Joining us now is former White House ethics lawyer Richard Painter and CNN law enforcement analyst and former Secret Service agent Jonathan Wackarow. Richard, I just want to start with you, counselor, here, because Paula was talking about this. What we're seeing, or not seeing, but know about at the grand jury today feels unusual because a grand jury investigation, by definition, is run by the prosecutors. The defense lawyer is not even in the room. So how will the questioning of Robert Costello even go today?
Well, we don't know what's going to happen and what he's going to say to the grand jury. This investigation has been going on for years. I submitted a amicus brief to the U.S. Supreme Court to allow the subpoenas to go forward from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. And we don't know what's going to happen with the grand jury, but we should keep in mind that Michael Cohen was charged and convicted, was guilty in connection with the payoffs to Stormy Daniels on behalf of individual number one. Well, that means that it's highly unusual for individual number one not also to be indicted. So I'd expect that to happen sometime soon. How it will play out, I'm not sure.
And stick with me for one more, Richard. As we look at all of this, and everybody's trying to read the tea leaves here, right? Trying to figure out what's going to happen. Part of that is because of what the former president put out over the weekend, saying that this was going to happen. As Paula said, his own attorneys refuting that. But the fact that this narrative is now out there, what does that do? How does that weigh on prosecutors at this point? How does that inform any decisions, if at all, knowing what could be coming in terms of a reaction?
Well, Donald Trump is going to try to play this to rev up his base and cause unrest, but the prosecutors should continue to do their job. That's what prosecutors are there for. The problem is that the much more serious charges are in the hands of the Department of Justice. The charges for sedition and insurrection in connection with events after the 2020 election. And unfortunately, we have a situation where the district attorneys, both in New York and in Fulton County, Georgia, are far ahead of the Department of Justice, or at least appear to be far ahead of the Department of Justice in their investigations and handling grand juries and moving toward indictments without DOJ having taken action on the most serious charges. The sedition and insurrection charges would disqualify Donald Trump from public office under the 14th Amendment, Section 3. Those really should be the first charges to be brought. They should have been brought a long time ago. It's been over 2 years since the insurrection of January 6th. And unfortunately, without air support from the Department of Justice, the district attorneys are going to be subjected to very vicious attacks from Donald Trump and his supporters, which I believe could feed into more civil unrest. It's a very, very precarious situation right now.
Jonathan, I want to bring you into this discussion because talk about unprecedented here. The possibility, and again, we don't know if it's going to happen, but the possibility of a former president being arrested raises all kinds of security concerns and processes that we've just never seen before. Yes, Trump called for protests over the weekend. There's that, and I'm sure there's security concerns there. What should we be looking for, and how will this even work? Which different agencies from the state, from the city, from the federal government might be involved with this?
John, great question. And listen, there's a lot of uncertainty. We don't have line of sight of exactly what the prosecutors are doing right now, but we do have line of sight of what law enforcement is doing. And what they're doing is, with the backdrop of actions from January 6th, they're being hyper coordinated around their efforts. And those efforts are across multiple law enforcement entities, both at the state, local, and federal level. But what's really interesting, John, is that the roles and responsibilities around all of the different law enforcement entities that are involved are different. They have a different remit on how they're addressing this issue. And let me just quickly walk you through what we're looking at. The NYPD, right? They are in charge of maintaining civil order. So what they're going to do is they're going to be focused on the area around the courthouse, but also New York City at large, right? There are multiple areas where protests could spark at a moment's notice. And remember, NYPD has a dual role here. Protesters are individuals who are exercising their First Amendment rights, and they need to be protected in the execution of those rights. But NYPD is also keenly aware of any type of violent activity that may stem from these protests. So they have a dual remit there on maintaining that civil order and protecting protesters. New York State court officers, they're the ones that are going to be protecting the courthouse, the physical building itself, again, from any type of activity. The FBI, they're involved. Why? Because they're monitoring for any types of violations of federal law by any of these protesters. They're looking for acts of potential domestic violence by extremists. So they're involved. Now you have the Secret Service, and the Secret Service playing an interesting role. Usually we see the Secret Service as a coordinating entity. They're the ones that usually come up with these security plans for rallies and speeches and any type of political event surrounding either a sitting or former president. But in this case, they're not. They are in a protective mode. They are viewing this as really an administrative movement where they have to protect Donald Trump from point A to point B, let him do his business before the court and leave. They are not playing that active role that we typically see them in. They're not providing the magnetometers at the courthouse. They're not providing the perimeter security that we typically see. Now, are they working with law enforcement partners? The answer is yes. They're going to be informed, but they are not the controlling entity, which is something rare that we typically don't see the Secret Service engage with.
Jonathan, real quickly, how much, if at all, have the events of January 6th, what we saw unfold there, influenced the preparations that are likely underway at this point?
Listen, they're heavily weighted, right? And I think that you've seen from January 6th across a whole variety of different types of events, both in New York, Washington, D.C., but across the nation. Law enforcement is heavily reliant upon information sharing, intelligence, and preparedness. They have to be. They have to plan for every type of eventuality, especially in a city like New York, where, there are multiple locations where incidents could occur, sparked by, and fueled by, social media posts from a whole variety of entities. So law enforcement has to be prepared. They have to be coordinated. They have to have those contingency plans in place. Hopefully they never have to use it. Hopefully, the calls for peaceful protests are adhered to, and all of that preparation is really going to be unnecessary. But should it be necessary, the NYPD, federal law enforcement entities, they are prepared to react.
Jonathan Wackwell, Richard Painter, really appreciate both joining us this morning. Thank you.
Help me understand what's going on today, because I don't think I've seen something quite like this before, where you have a grand jury investigation and the person being investigated is allowed to basically ask for a witness at the end here. How is this going to work? Who's going to ask Costello questions? What's going to happen?
John, thanks for having me back. What's going to happen today is the exercise of Donald Trump's rights. They're very broad under New York law, unusually so. That's why Donald Trump himself was invited to the grand jury, but instead he's sending in a proxy in the form of attorney Robert Costello. Now, remember, Mr. Costello represented Michael Cohen, and he was criticized in the report of special counsel Robert Mueller for what, to me, tiptoed up to the line of witness tampering. At one point telling Michael Cohen he has powerful friends, obviously referring to the president, and he should sleep well tonight before he cooperated. Trump and Trump World turned on Cohen, of course, when he did cooperate. Costello's lawyer relationship ended with Cohen. Now Costello is going to come in and share information from that attorney-client relationship, apparently saying that Cohen was telling a different story before he cooperated. But John, we know that already. Cohen has admitted to that. So they'll bring in Cohen, possibly, if Costello needs to be rebutted, to say, yes, I wasn't candid before I've cooperated. I've been candid since. I've analyzed Cohen's statements since he began cooperating, and they have been rock solid. He's told the same account about the president's hush money to influence the 2016 election.